from you, just so everybody is aware. We can continue, please. Just want to make sure everybody's.
Yes,
Yes, that's
Didn't we talk about you, Mr. Kramer? Because if you're like me, wearing a mask, I can't hear. I don't know what. I swear that things. If I'm still eating.
We're fine. We're totally fine. Okay, 6 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock, so I'll gavel us to order. If you could please join us in pledging allegiance to our flag.
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if anyone here is a member of the public and wants to speak during our comment period, please take a vote sheet and deliver it up here to Mrs. Cates, if you would, please. Our next item is to approve the agenda. Are there any addenda? Is there a motion?
So moved, Madam Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask those trustees who would like to approve the agenda as presented to signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same sign. Any abstentions? And that is approved unanimously. And I don't believe we have any public comment on our policy revision. So we'll move on to item E. We are considering proposed revisions to District Policy 1260 as presented on introduction and first reading. Could we have a motion? And a second?
Second.
And now discussion about the policy options being presented.
Madam Chair, if it'd be all right, I can kind of just speak to the different options that are in front of the trustees. So as you're aware, District Policy 1260, sex offenders on school property. You can see on what is probably the most closely related to our policy that has been in place and looked at as option 1. Option 1 is very similar with just some additions to that we have from a neighboring school district that added just a couple of items in relation to the school administrator being present, special events, and then more of the outline, but very, very similar in nature to the original policy, in which it was much of the onus on that decision was taking place by the administrator at the school. And if a school individual was there, it did not eliminate certain applications based on any spelled out actions. It is very much for interpretation by either the principal or the superintendent, almost to the point of where the majority, if not all, applications would be permissible based on that policy that is currently in place. In the packet, there's also then option 2. And just to kind of update, all these options have been reviewed by Tracy Copenhaver, the school legal representation. And so they've all been passed through him, so to take a look and see what he thought. There was some small language changes. You'll notice in option 2, there are a number or/ands. If the trustees would want to go with an option 2, it would be the recommendation from committee that we go through each or/and and determine if that is something that we feel should be a part of the policy or eliminated. What was generated in conversation was as many as possible could be, at least from the start, and then through this meeting, the trustees could say, we feel that this is either not appropriate within this policy, or we feel our policy is stringent enough with these or ands, and eliminate some of those, because some of them do tend to, in some places, duplicate, but in others, there's some openness. This would be very stringent and offer a very tight definition of individuals who have been convicted of any sex offender crime and whether they would be allowed on school property. Then option 3 is very succinct. It is very to the point in regards to it would eliminate all adult sex offenders registered in any state, city, or territory from access to the school property. The only time that they would be deemed necessary would be if a meeting is requested by the school district, and that event would occur after school hours at the central administration office. This is very similar to Laramie School District number 1's policy that they currently have in place. So really we have the 3 different options. Option 2 does require a little bit more discussion on or ands, and I would be glad to answer any questions on those, or be able to answer any questions on any of the other options that are listed.
Any comments from trustees at this time?
I just wanted to share with the rest of the trustees that I have been contacted by a few members of the community, and the ones that contacted me after our options 1, 2, and 3 were made public. The ones that contacted me were in support of option 3.
I'll piggyback on that comment that I haven't received any comments since these have been made available, but all the public comment I received prior to these options being public really kind of mirror what is happening in option 3.
Is there any other discussion?
In one instance, sorry.
I think my opinion would be that we study option 2 to be a more flexible option than option 3. I think there's a lot of different levels of offenders that probably don't fit into the absolutely no attendance to any school events option.
Thank you, Trustee McCall. Trustee Miller?
Similar to Trustee McClellan, I think that there are a couple of instances that option 2 addresses that would allow certain individuals to attend. For instance, the one that comes immediately to mind, and I was part of the committee that studied these 3 options, was specifically a sex offender who was very young, maybe an 18-year-old father and a 15-year-old mother. They actually now are wed, have children, and him not being able to attend games or events for that child, even though it's 10 years later. I don't know if that is a good option. And I worry that by it being as restrictive as this policy is, maybe we make it easier to break in some instances. Like they're just not going to come forward and tell you. Maybe not being completely right.
And one of the few comments that was directed to me was that if we have a policy similar to option 2 in place, we've got a process by which a sex offender is identified, is seated in a certain area, and is monitored throughout an event. both for the offender's safety and for the safety of students. And so that was something that the comment that I was given, just for whatever that's worth. We have a motion to consider the proposed revisions on the floor. And Trustee Bullington, was that your motion? Would you like to amend that motion to include only options 2 and 3?
Yes, I will do that.
And-
So I move that we discuss options 2 and 3 only.
And Trustee Jesperson, was that your second?
Yeah, I'll second
And
that.
you second the amended motion?
Yes.
So is it the will of the trustees that option 2 go back to the policy committee for a little more refinement?
I think that we should do as the policy committee suggested and work through each one of these things. And if we're going to consider option 2, we should go through it, discuss each one and decide, come up with some kind of consensus and put it there. And then we can choose between the 2 that we're to be considering. Okay, suggestion.
Madam Chairman, we thought this was needed to be expedited and taken care of immediately.
Right. And we're looking at second and final reading next week. Am I correct in the whole page?
Yes, that's why we
If we go through with this now.
All right. So I'm having the impression that it's the will of the trustees that we do go through option 2 and refine what we'd like it to say. Okay. Is there anything preceding the first and or statement in the middle of the page that you feel needs examination or clarification?
I do have a question. The first yellow bullet, GCSD number 1, school administrator must be present at the event in order for a sex offender to attend an event, including use by an outside organization. I wonder about that because as I see 2 or and below that, the taking place in the, it says sponsored by the Goshen County School District. I just know that some outside organizations use our facilities.
Yeah, and that actually is the reason. So I'll take you through those 2 different bullets and maybe we can refine those. The thought process in that first one, the first highlighted bullet, is to allow, because of building use permission, that in the event that there would be a sex offender applying for application to attend, a school administrator would have to be in attendance at that activity or event, youth event. As I refer to it as number 2 or and, in which sponsored by the Goshen County School District, there are events in which we host, and what we were thinking of events like those up at, we've hosted tournament games at EWC's gym that kind of fall into this, they're occurring under our sponsorship, our rules kind of need to apply in those situations, and unless it's spelled out, how do we still have those situations? Those are the 2 thoughts on those bullets, but I don't know, like you said, when you read through it, what is truly trying to be said there?
So I guess that leads to another question for me. Do we have staff, we have willingness from staff to attend extra events that are not sponsored by the district?
In some situations, those individuals are parents or relation to those, and they have been attendants. It would, in fact, sometimes if that group would want to have access, they would need to then contact and arrange for an administrator, just school administrator to be there, or it would be deemed necessarily that we would not be able to allow access to sex offender to those outside organizations events while on campus.
And we also talked about the fact that we're not requiring staff to be administrators to volunteer to be at those events. It would be up to those organizations to see if there was going to be any administrator there, but we're not going to require that somebody volunteer to do that.
So then if we did not have a willing administrator to go to these events, access would be denied for that event based on that reason.
Correct.
Okay, and that would be an acceptable reason according to our lawyer.
That is correct.
Is there a reason that the wording in some of our and or statements is the sex offender's offense rather than crime? Did we have any, is that?
No, it could certainly be changed to that vocabulary usage.
But no, Mr. Copenhaver didn't have any recommendations.
No, he did
Okay.
not. But I don't think he would have any problem with either word in that situation if we felt that crime more appropriately defined that situation as opposed to offense.
You need to announce.
Madam Chair,
Sir,
I have a question regarding actually where it's item B, where it says if the event is held on another campus, the offender must obtain special permission from the specific principal of that campus to attend the event. Is that prior to submitting permission or the request to the superintendent?
Trustee Sestito, if you just repeat that a second, I kind of lost you on there for a moment, unless.
My question is that permission for from the specific principal of the campus that they're attending, is that to he's to get, or he or she to get permission from the principal before they request permission from the superintendent?
They should be in conjunction, is where that they should start with the principal on that campus as opposed to just going to the district level. And so the intention is for them to have that campus contacted first, and then as proceeding with the policy, go on to to include the superintendent in that consultation to make that decision.
Okay, and I'm just going to make this point just right now. I thank you for that clarification, just in case it gets lost. But I would ask that something be added towards the end, where immediately following the school event, that they will leave the premises immediately. Where again, that's where the chaotic piece may be, where everybody's kind of mulling around and things like that, that it's going to be made clear that once the event is over, that they are to leave immediately.
thank you, Trustee Saucedo. That definitely does need to be added.
On that point of specific, from permission from the specific principal on the campus, that's not referring to away events, correct? Because that falls under the policy of that school district, because we're not sponsoring the event. We may be attending, but not sponsoring.
Correct.
So that, we're not talking about any other schools.
No, we do not unfortunately have any jurisdiction over any other schools' policies and do not exceed their policies.
Madam Chair, under the first bullet, I'm curious if we could include school administrator or appointee, So I fear that our administrators, if they say no, we might have one administrator that says no because they have other conflicts frequently. Whereas they could appoint one of their staff to fulfill that duty in that moment.
And share with me again, Trustee Miller, what bullet point you're looking at.
It's the first highlighted bullet, the GCSD #1 school administrator
Or designee
or designee.
is how we usually do it. Thank you, sir.
And then the second bullet doesn't allow for the situation I had previously described. And that is the one that I have had people contact me about because that situation has occurred multiple places in the district already, which is a really interesting situation. But I don't know how the policy and that practice can go together.
Yeah. I wonder if we could put some language in such as not to include a statutory offense.
So to Trustee Miller's point, I guess my question, it would be on the second page, the number 13 years of application, that the offense of the law occurred within 13 years. What's the key to that number? Why that number?
That number was requested simply because we didn't want a situation where maybe a child was perpetrated on as a kindergartner, and then in high school, the offender is allowed to come to an event, which is still going to affect that, the victim. And so 13 years would assure that the child would be out of school by the time the offender wanted to attend. If that makes sense.
Trustee Saucedo, did you hear all that?
Yes, I did. Thank you. I was just, I was thinking about what the situation that Zach described as far as, the relationship and the age difference. Yeah, then I was just reading the other points. I just wasn't tying that together, but yeah, that totally makes sense to me.
So our bullet about the second or third degree offenses, would that, if we had only that, would that eliminate would we be able to just, I don't know, with statutory offenses or a third degree or sometimes first or second? I don't know.
I don't know either, and I did not
Yes.
research any of that. Do you have a sense of where that falls?
No, and I think it's very dependent upon each individual event and where each district attorney, I don't necessarily believe that we could say unilaterally as a situation like Trustee Miller described would always be under a third degree. I don't know that we could certainly say that that would be an all-time occurrence depending upon the situation and that they find themselves in, and what degree the district attorney or those making those charges determined to go with.
Is there a way we could maybe combine the situation in this first thing or under the age of 18 and then this bullet point about the 13 years? Because I think that's what we're trying to, I don't know, those are two different thoughts.
That's all right.
Forgive me.
We're working on things.
I would suggest that we, considering what we've discussed, that we just agree to remove the first and or scenario. Because I think some of these other things maybe cover that with the time and
Remove the under age of 18, is that what you're talking about?
yeah.
Would there be consensus to remove that bullet to continue the discussion in relation to Trustee Miller's identification of a concern relating to that situation, or go ahead, Trustee Miller.
My concern, I think, while it's valid, especially in that situation, the other bullets also preclude. And so I don't know that we can make an exception for it unless there is a way to say, maybe put an if statement, you know, a statutory rate. I don't know how that occurs. But that could be very difficult. I think maybe we just take that off the table. Just know that that is a concern, but I don't know how you write a policy around that individual that it may be 2 or 3 times in the district it affects 2 or 3 families, which will be unfortunate. But you'd have to remove a lot of bullets to allow that to occur.
And Trustee Miller, do you have the sense that these offenders have been adjudicated?
I know that one has for sure. The one that has contacted me, they are prosecuted and they are registered.
Okay, thank you.
You know, and I guess the thing is looking at the bigger picture. So hypothetically, let's talk about that situation if it was to occur that way. And then, you know, 1 year everything's fine and everything's good. They're requesting to attend, you know, these school activities. And then in 2 years, the relationship isn't good. And then does that cloud it? The picture in being able to give permission.
I think to that point, I don't think you can shape policy around it, although it's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Without an attorney writing a lot of language specific to that situation.
Madam Chair, in looking at this, it almost seems as though right after it says added October 2020, the next 4 bullet points in A and B, maybe even as well as the first bullet point, Goshen County School District 1, could be actually lumped together with the last 2 and orders on page 2. And then everything else in between that are conditions that would exclude an individual from attending anything within the district.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it runs into each other. There's this is what you need to do to apply, this is why you would get in, this is back to what you would need to submit. It seems like it just needs to be just cleaned up a little bit.
And rearranged?
Yes, rearrangement, definitely.
Yeah, because it does seem as though we might have, you know, a procedure directions, but then exclusions to our policy.
And at that point, you can do away with the and or, just be, if any of these apply, the following list apply, the person would be denied access.
Does anyone know enough about the law to say what first, second, and third degree entail?
I was just
Have
looking at that. First degree seems to be the assault that is typically envisioned as a forcible or using a weapon. The actor causes submission of the victim by threat of death, serious bodily injury, extreme physical pain, or kidnapping. The victim is physically helpless. That's first degree. Second degree is an actor who inflicts sexual intrusion on a victim, commits sexual assault in the second degree if The actor causes submission of the victim by threatening to retaliate in the future against the victim or the victim's family members, or the victim reasonably believes the actor will execute this threat. The actor causes submission of the victim by any means that would prevent resistance by a victim of ordinary resolution. And then third degree is an actor commits sexual assault in the third degree if, under circumstances not constituting sexual assault in the first or second degree, the actor subjects a victim to sexual contact under any of the circumstances of another statute without inflicting sexual intrusion on the victim and without causing serious bodily injury to the victim. Does that help?
It's my understanding that that bullet came from a discussion that Mr. Kramer had with,
Tracy?
well, maybe Mr.
A probation officer appointed to an individual that was a sex offender and has worked with other sex offenders. There isn't, again, when we talk about the offense, he was the one that mentioned the definition is very defined and created, but then there is some pieces to that make it more difficult, because there may be certain situations in which during the process and looking at which degree to follow through, there may be pieces of evidence that not necessarily deemed that they would be able to seek a more stringent degree would be more difficult. And so the district attorney may choose to go with a lesser degree to make sure and have a conviction in those situations. And so there was some hesitancy to recommend that as a perfect science in regards to defining around policy, or any of the situations in which they took a look at it in evaluating sex offenders. There's not necessarily a one score or one degree that perfectly defines an offense dealing with sex offenders. Just as in bullet number 6 also talks about the probation officer, or if not on probation, a risk assessment. Those would be things that a probation officer might utilize to determine themselves in which capacity a sex offender should have conversations or meetings with family members or their own children to that degree. And so that's why that was also added. What the committee kind of talked about was really giving not necessarily these in order or a hierarchy, but giving trustees examples of what some options might be, whether they choose to add all of them or whether they choose to add only one. It was the desire of the committee to make sure there were plenty of options for the trustees to consider when making this review or discussion. And even those that still might be needed after this process to be added. That is certainly an option also.
I had some questions about the last and or situation. First one might be sex offender must submit court records to the superintendent. Would court records be helpful to you?
That was another one, because in some situations, the court documents very well the situation and could it be of assistance making that determination. In others, as I talked with the probation officer, there may be minimal records to utilize in that situation, making that a determining factor.
And the next question is, any offense or lack of compliance will immediately be reported to local law enforcement. First of all, I'm assuming that's while on property. I mean, it doesn't state, I assume that's while the person is on the property.
I think that means if a individual, how I envision it is an after the fact, that we are contacted by a community member so-and-so was attending your event. Did they give you notification? We looked for the records. No, there was no notification. They did not apply. So then we would then report that to local law enforcement that a registered sex offender did come on to our facility, and it violates our policy along with what they are deemed to have to follow also.
So I don't think that should be part of this and/or situation. I think that should be a separate piece of our policy. I mean, I think that's a given, that if we find out we have this policy and sex offenders aren't following it, we need to report that. And I don't think that should be and/or, I think it should be moved and just be part of whatever policy.
So I'm having bullet number 8 recommended that it be moved. Then would that be under the first highlighted bullet, Trustee Miller, or where do you think that would be best placed?
I mean, I think that would just be one of these bullet points of the policy. I mean,
Below the October 2020.
yeah.
Yeah.
Does
Should it
I mean,
go
does
after-
everybody else agree there? I mean, that's just a given that shouldn't maybe even have to be stated, but if we're gonna state it, it should be there.
Well, Trustee Clayton was talking about combining that with those first 4.
Yeah.
As being part of the process as opposed to some of the options. I think that helps things up too.
Well, and I don't even know, does the policy have to state some of these things, or would that be a procedural rig that would go, that would be listed afterward? What all they have to go through? Is that part of the policy or is that the procedure?
I think in my experience as an administrator, I would prefer that it be part of policy, so it's very clearly spelled out. And so there's no, well, the principal at Southeast did this, and the principal at LFL did not do this. And when we have it spelled out in policy, what we've kind of found is, as we've been reviewing policy and policy committee, we have those administrative regulations, and then we have policy. What we've been finding is that they kind of mesh a little bit better when we put it just in policy as opposed to having 2 separate documents to take a look at. So my recommendation would be just to move it to one of those other bullets underneath, added October 2020.
And I would agree with that, because I think that if we have schools doing something different, we would, if it's in policy, we would avoid maybe a parent moving to that school that will allow this kind of a situation. And we don't want that. We don't want people to move to a different, just because they can get away with something.
Am I correct in concluding that it's the consensus of the group to reconfigure this document and bring it back at our next regular meeting, or forward it as quickly as possible to everyone for their examination prior to the meeting? Is that with masks on, I can't read your faces very well.
One of the things that I see that on the very last or the very last bullet of that, it's the right of each principal of each campus to determine the level of access for the offender with the consultation of the superintendent. And I'm wondering if that could be a separate bullet, and then we add, unless the following apply, and put our and ors under that. So where, to me, if that right there, separate from our and or says, oh, well, the principal could accept.
I disagree. I'm sorry, but I think level of access, once they've been granted access into the building, I don't know, I think that's My idea as we were forming this was, first and foremost, we gotta protect the kids. And second, we need to make this so that it's as black and white as possible as to who we're granting access and who we're not granting access. I think we had too much gray into this and we're opening ourselves up to other problems. So I don't know, I don't like that bullet. For face value period.
Well, it certainly contributes to some inequitable application of the policy. And then, would you ask Tracy if that would open up us to a liability suit?
On bullet number 9, just to make sure I'm
It's
understanding.
the right of each principal to determine.
Yes. Well, I think we could either do that or define through in this policy very clearly, what access should they have? And I think if anybody would have suggestions on that, we can certainly add that without any problem whatsoever. Tracy, as many school attorneys would advise, they prefer not black and white, if that actually kind of makes sense, and not as stringent in their interpretations in some cases. As a school administrator, I prefer in some policies to be very, very specific, and especially I think Trustee Jesperson is spot on. I would not have any problem with defining exactly what access to each camp, eliminate that bullet, and then the trustees define what does access look like. It means going directly from your vehicle to the facility, checking in with the administrator, and then as Trustee Saucedo, immediately following the event, you leave and go immediately to your vehicle and remove yourself from the campus. I think
I like that.
so.
Yes.
We certainly can define that, and I have no hesitation, or I would appreciate it as an administrator, as I'm thinking most of our administrators would, especially with this policy.
I have two questions. First is for our representatives from the schools. Do you have an opinion on this policy that you prefer to see?
I know that we submitted an email statement, and my opinion on this, I don't think that they should be allowed regardless of either way. They made their choice, and you have to think, were they thinking of their own children when they made that choice? So the minute that they did that, they lost the privileges to kids. That's just my opinion.
I don't necessarily have as clear the idea or opinion on it. I don't feel very, to give my opinion, but yeah. But everything the board has discussed today, I haven't disagreed with. I've agreed with. So.
It's a tough and complex issue.
My second question would be, by the time we put all of these bullets in place, have we come back to policy 3?
Yes.
Who are we really allowing in after we've done this? Maybe a grandpa of an athlete, but it's definitely not the parent. A couple of our bullets preclude that. And I believe it may just be easier at that point to move to 3. Although I was definitely, as I said in the policy, I really like the idea of 2. But if you go through that, the funnel gets narrower, a bit further down you go. You might allow 1 or 2 individuals. With this strict of a policy, that would,
I know.
I think pretty much on the committee, everybody said we would prefer none. But let's take a look at, I can look at that.
And Clara pointed out, Clara, I did not share your email with the rest of the trustees. I kept it confidential, but I'm happy to share it. She pointed out that we are televising a lot of events. And so the hardship on a parent who falls into this category is ameliorated substantially. And, you know, with parent-teacher conferences, et cetera, again, we have some capabilities, and that it is possible for parents to participate fully.
I think we have to think about is what our goal is. If our goal is highest level of protection for our students, what's the best policy going forward? Just a question.
Is there a need for another amendment to the motion? Is there a need for us to withdraw the motion and submit a different motion based on our conversations?
The motion wasn't clear anyway about what we were recommending.
Oh,
So it was recommending that we discuss, which we should have.
that's true. That's not a very robust recommendation, is it?
I would suggest we withdraw the motion and start over.
All right,
I withdraw the motion.
all right. Mrs. Bullington, would you like to submit a substitute motion?
Madam Chair, I would submit that we vote on number 3 as in the policy for Ocean County School District.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion on the policies? All right. Those,
Sorry, we may just want to amend the motion to be on first reading.
on first reading.
On
Yes,
first reading.
yes. And I'm sorry,
Just procedural.
I felt like that was understood, but you're right. We need to specify that on first reading, that we will approve example number 3 or option 3 as submitted by the district policy committee. Is that everyone's understanding of what we're doing? All right, those truth. Go ahead.
Can I just have some clarification on the wording on that?
Yes, sir.
So I guess it says unless a meeting is requested by the school district, that will occur after school hours at the central administration office. In what case would you have need for a meeting?
In a situation where there's an individualized education plan for a special education student, or the need for a student or a parent-teacher conference, that could be set up to be in person here at central administration.
We had staff at the policy meeting that just said there are times when we have to meet with that parent.
Uh-huh.
And we want to be able to do that as safely as possible.
Those trustees who wish to approve option 3 on first reading, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. And any abstentions? And trustee Christine Miller is abstaining from this vote. And trustee Saucedo, did I allow you a chance to vote?
I approved.
Okay, thank you, sir. So this moves forward to second reading on a vote of 8 to 0 with 1 abstention. All right, and I'm afraid I have to absent myself from the remainder of the meeting, and I would turn our gavel over to Vice Chair Christine Miller. Thank you, folks.
The next item on our agenda, letter F, consider acceptance of resignation submitted by Deb Clinner, DHS counselor. The recommendation is to accept her resignation submitted effective November 24th, 2020.
So
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there discussion?
Vice Chair, is there repercussions for employees that leave prior to contract completion?
currently, we do not have anything in policy that remediates or requires the other action to be taken on that. The difficulty with some of those situations is what that constitutes and how that can be done equitably. Trustee Patrick and I have had discussions in previous year to have that discussed in policy as to if that would be possibilities to look at, because there are districts that do have some forms of requirements set upon that. Examples might be the cost of advertising and those type of things.
Question, does the district and or the school intend to replace this position?
Yes, we currently have opened this position up and will be reviewing candidates in a short time period.
I guess that was my question, because just for the lack of, I mean, the timing is just, it's horrible. Being that it's November 24th, we're entering the holiday seasons. There will not be a big gap in services for our kids.
That is correct. We're hoping to get somebody on board. I believe interviews are taking place, I believe, this week. Is that correct, Mr. Blendell? I see. Yep. So interviews will be taking place this week for that position. So we should, and I know that we do have, and fortunately, a number of highly qualified candidates for this position. I believe they are interviewing a number of candidates that have all been deemed appropriate for this position.
Is there further discussion? If no, let's proceed to vote. You agree to accept the resignation submitted by Deb Clinard effective November 24th, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. Letter G, discuss and consider a district indoor track program for the 2020-2021 school year. Due to COVID, a combination agreement between high schools may not be possible this year. The recommendation is to discuss and consider the possible addition of a district indoor track program. I would recommend that we just have a discussion at this moment without a motion, since it doesn't say whether we should be for or against. I suggest we have a discussion and then proceed with a motion if we choose to. Discussion?
Madam Chairman, do we have someone here that might explain what that would look like? Without our kids going to Cheyenne and doing their track or whatever?
Coach Lashley would be able to speak to that. I know we also do, fortunately, we had a number of board members be able to sit on a committee meeting where that was also shared. So I know two of our board members, but Coach Lashley, if you want to start off and then.
Well, I can yield to the board first and then answer questions. It doesn't, however you guys want to do it.
One of those board members has left our presence.
That's correct.
Who's the
Trustee
other?
Clayton, Trustee Bullington were members of that committee, so they'd certainly be able to speak to their thoughts and discussion centered around that committee.
Your preference. You guys or him? What do you think?
From the start.
That's fine.
So I learned a lot in this meeting we sat through. They've been going to Cheyenne for indoor track since 2004. The busing already happens. Students from all three schools. There's over 30 that participate now. I did not know that. So this is talked about. This would be an additional sport that could be that the athletes that don't play basketball or don't wrestle, so female athletes would have something else to do as well for the winter months. But also the folks that have been doing the coaching have been doing this on a volunteer basis since 2004. Even some of them sometimes driving their own vehicles to get students to Cheyenne. And as Mr. Blendell and Mr. Lashley said, Goshen County has helped Cheyenne win several state championships in certain events. So it sounds very good. And kind of our discussion centered around is, since most likely because of COVID, they won't be able to combine anymore, but if there's going to be like a 3A, 8 or 9 schools that do 3A, then Goshen County could potentially participate in that for the 2020 or the 21 school year. But just that year only, and also compensate 2 coaches 2 to 3 during that time as well. So that was the gist of our discussion. They're the costs we're already pretty much paying. We have the uniforms, the transportation is already happening. And then the needs are going to be cut back significantly due to COVID restrictions as well. I know that in the discussion there at that meeting, it sounds very favorable for this year if we're able to do that.
I think the only thing that, we discussed would be, an increase in what we're already paid for is the coaches. And, these coaches have been doing this voluntary. And I think if we're going to vote this in and we still consider asking them to do that voluntary, I just don't think that's right. If we are going to vote in this track program, we need to compensate those coaches for what they're doing.
Can I ask why we have coaches voluntarily? Are these coaches that go with our kids to Cheyenne, or because if they're part of the Cheyenne program, those are technically their coaches, correct? So what are our people doing voluntarily?
We have to provide supervision for our students at all times. So when they're practicing, whether it's in the hallway, whether we're outside, whatever, we have to have supervision. When we take our student athletes to Cheyenne to practice, which we do most of the time once a week, sometimes it occurs twice, but mostly on Thursday nights, we have to have Goshen County supervision right to us. And so to provide an opportunity for our kids, there have been a core group of us through the years that have just done it. Because we knew if we didn't, then our kids wouldn't have those opportunities. And some, in all fairness, some kids are not basketball or wrestling kids, and specifically girls. I mean, in the winter, really basketball is the only true option that they have. They could wrestle, and we do have a couple that do that. But by and large, basketball is their only choice. I mean, in the fall, if you're not a volleyball player, well, you can play tennis, you can golf, you can run cross country. There's all kinds of options, but in the winter, there is none. And I had a daughter that was not a basketball player back in the day, and so I wanted her to have the opportunity to do something. We all know, participation in activities, what that means to kids, and their grades are better, their behavior's better. I mean, there's research out there that shows that. So that's why we've been volunteering all these years, just to make it happen for our kids. The concerns this year, as far as the combination school agreement with Cheyenne Central, number one, where they're going to reduce the number of entries that schools are going to be allowed to have. We just really wonder if Cheyenne is going to actually enter any of our kids, because they're going to want to take care of their kids first. All these years, at all the regular season meets, it's unlimited entries. So all of our kids can compete in whatever we wanted every single meet. This year, that's not going to happen. My other concern, and probably more so than anything, is the fact that WHSA wants us to even practice in pods. They said the same thing in volleyball and football, same for basketball. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to load a bus with a group of Goshen County kids, take them down to Cheyenne and practice with a bunch of Cheyenne kids. I mean, whether we contaminate them, they contaminate us. I don't think in this COVID environment that we live in, that's a very smart change. So, there's a couple things there kind of at play. Hope I answered your question.
Well, I think you also said that, it could be that they would go clear to Cheyenne to practice, and Trumpton or Goshen County would be in their own pod there. So what would be the point of going to Cheyenne to just practice with 30 people anyway, if you do that here?
So is indoor track a 3A sport?
Right now, there's only one classification for indoor track and field. So there are currently 24 schools that participate in track and field for indoor. I'm on the indoor track and field committee that's meeting because of COVID, and our meeting was postponed. We're now supposed to meet tomorrow by Zoom, WHSAA. And in order to make the meet smaller, at our first meeting, it was talked about splitting the state meet up into like boys and girls. But the problem with that was you have the same coaches. So if you've got the girls in Gillette for state, all your coaches go up there to coach their kids. Who's back with the boys practicing that week? And so I brought up that it made more sense to me to split it up into 3A and 4A. Because we're not the only ones that are gonna be in this situation. For instance, Buffalo co-ops with Sheridan, Powell co-ops with Cody. Well, they're probably gonna be in the same boat because these other schools, I mean, I don't know for a fact, that's why I'm saying could. It's looking like they may not wanna have that co-op. So there's gonna be other 3A schools that are gonna be kind of flying solo, which would then increase the number of 3A schools, so you could almost have 15 3A and 15 4A schools potentially at state meets, separate places, separate weekends. So as of right now, there's not a 3A division. It has been talked about in the past, and I'm thinking this might just be the opportunity to make that happen.
Mr. Flindle, tennis only has one class right now, is that correct, or is it?
Yes, just one. Madam Chairman, Mr. Lashley. The kids travel to Cheyenne to practice in their facility. What would we do to enhance our facility for these young ladies and young men to be able to participate at the level in which they need to be?
Actually, the last couple of years, Coach Sims has kind of already started that transition. And in the gym here at Central Office, he moved in high jump pits, pole vault pit. The ag kids have actually made like a elevated runway, like plywood runway, so that they could work on the pole vault. So when they set the pole vault pits up, they made throwing rings so that they can throw their indoor shots in here. So he kind of has already put together some training apparatuses that are available. Obviously, they also use this for basketball and stuff, so each day has to put everything away, and then when they're done, he comes in and sets it all up. So we are starting to, we do have some things already here for our own kids that we did not have before. So we're headed in that direction.
How about like the sprints and things like that?
You know, realistically, that's not really a problem. We have starting blocks that we just take the spikes and stuff out of, and you like put a rug down, and then you just set them like against the wall. Like in Lingo, we do our sprinting. It's kind of interesting, from the far west middle school doors, those doors going out to the high school office is 100 meters. And it's pretty much straight shot. There's a little bit of a dog leg in it, but it's pretty much a straight shot. So, you know, we get a lot of mileage out of running. And if we want to run 200s, we just run there and back, and it's a 200. So we try to go outside as often as we can. If the weather's nice, like what it is right now, if this would occur in January, February, we'd be going outside on the track and running. The distance kids go out and run all the time. See, that's the other thing to consider. You really can't do this with 1 or 2 people because of liability things. When you have people pole vaulting and throwing, and you got distance runners out running, you know. And I think that's another thing that we talked about was if this were to work, we fund for this year 2 positions, but if we needed more than that, we would just split up the coaching stipend between however many people did it. Isn't that what kind of discussion was?
Yes. That would be up to the principals to determine how many.
I don't know. You guys know I'm a track and field guy, so you know, obviously, I would like to keep our kids here in Goshen County as much as we could. We have sent some phenomenal kids down to Cheyenne, won state championships for them. In fact, 1 year on the girls' side, if you would have taken the Goshen County points and given them to the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th place team, that team would have won the state title instead of Cheyenne Central. So, but I think it'd be cool if they could represent Goshen County instead of someone else. Also understand financial implications. I get that. I'm sorry.
Just for clarification too, is the coach to athlete ratio 1:12?
That's what our formula recommendation says, yes. But we do, in certain sports, we do have, you know, we do waiver a little bit on that because of supervision issues. Like in football, we always go a little bit more because of the liability there. Track and field has typically been the same way.
Are there other questions for clarification?
And one of the reasons that we talked about doing it for this year, where it was twofold, is let's see if there's enough participation to consider moving forward after this year. But also, we don't know what the financial stability will be for next year. We know we can probably fund it this year.
Does, do you have something?
Yeah, just I guess a question, and you alluded that the ag kids have built some stuff, and my recollection is that an indoor track requires ramps around the corners to make the turn, is that correct? So that the corners are not ramped? Okay.
They can be, and in really top of the line facilities they are. But no, you don't have to be. It is very difficult to sprint indoors on the curves. I mean, like the Cheyenne facility, they don't even contest the 200 meters because you can't do it. It'll just take you right off the track. It's hard to run. You always have to be looking about 5 strides ahead. It's different. So no, it does not have to be banked. And we wouldn't have the facility to do like an indoor, 200 meter or 160 meter track. We would still be finding hallways and wherever we could to run that part of the work.
At this point, does somebody choose to make a motion?
Can I just ask before we make the motion, what your season's going to run from what to what?
It starts right after we get back from Christmas break. And the state indoor meet is typically held the exact same weekend as state 1A basketball.
Did you hear that?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or?
I have a question. I participated in indoor track last year, and all of our practices as schools in the district were separate. We were all at our own schools. So would practices be held together, especially with the big pole vaulting here? Would it be held in Torrington then?
That would be my hope, that if we're going to have a team, then we're a team. And just, I guess, for clarification, so you all know, if this works, I mean, if we have other applicants to be the coaches, that's great. I would remove myself from that because I have plenty of other things to do. As long as my kids are taken care of and they're in a program, that's my goal. So I'm not like trying to get another couple $1,000. That's not why I'm here. I totally trust the other track coaches in our district. Some of them have already been on my track staff prior to this anyway. So I just wanted to clarify that I'm not here trying to give myself a couple $1,000.
So would it be advisable to do a motion now or make it pending if a 3A program were actually sanctioned?
I would think it appropriate to make it, I mean, I think we didn't have enough information with no recommendation either way on our agenda. So now that we have some background information, I would think it would be great to entertain a motion.
And I would like to make that motion, Madam Chair.
And your motion is?
That we, pending 3A approval for a program to actually vote on the next board meeting, if that happens that quickly.
So your motion is?
To approve a Goshen County indoor track team. Pending approval for 3A.
I mean, we could just put it on the agenda next week and we don't have to go. Am I right,
I do-
Mr. Kramer?
I do know there was a preference to identify with the Wyoming High School Association as soon as possible and give them notification that we would be operating as a singular team, especially when they're having their meetings to discuss indoor track. The number of teams may determine how they organize that. The other piece with that, I don't know that I would recommend a 3A contingent on that, because I think you do put then potentially our students and our coaches in limbo possibly. I think a contingency that if you would say, the only contingency that I could see is if Cheyenne Central would not be interested in sharing. I think Mr. Lashley did bring up some excellent points on, even if they did, that might not be in our best interest. But I don't know that I would recommend having the caveat of if they have a 3A program. Because I do think too, regardless if they have 3A or 4A, I think one, our kids would get to participate even if they were just a 4A and everybody's the same. And it just deals with competitive piece there. So that's my thoughts on that.
That
There's
is
many
correct,
options.
right, that if we approve this and they don't do a 3A, they would just be,
Yeah, we would still compete with everybody else like we always would, except it'd be a coaching council. And our kids would be basically guaranteed the opportunity to compete. You know, like, Sarah, for instance, good distance runner, but Cheyenne Central is known for their distance runners. And it may work out where she wouldn't get a chance to compete if they're limiting the number of entries that Cheyenne Central can have. And yes, WHSAA would like to know if there are 3A schools that are going to go off on their own, because then that would encourage them to break off and have enough schools for a 3A classification.
So, Mr. Clayton.
So I would amend that, we would a motion to approve the indoor track program for Goshen County.
So trustee Clayton has moved that we approve an indoor track program for the 2020-2021 school year
Second.
for 1 year. Is
Yes.
that
With
your intent?
sorry, I guess we need to add to with compensation for coaching.
With compensation. One year approval with compensation for coaching. Is that the motion?
Yes.
Your second? Now that we have a motion on the floor, I guess my question would go to finances. I would ask maybe our business manager, what's the status? How would we pay? Where do we stand on budgeting?
The cost, as it's shown here right now, would not exceed $11,000. I can't tell you, where we're going to end the year, but I can share with you that we do have carryover that very much exceeds this. That being a 1 year program, I think you're very safe.
Other discussion?
Just while I am in support, and I think that there's a lot of us, it's interesting with the potential cliff coming up that we're hearing from the state's budget and not replacing some teachers in the district. How we fund extracurriculars, I think it's interesting. It'll be, I think, something for the board to struggle with in the future is how we fund those programs and if there's other alternatives for revenue to keep some of these programs, to Mr. Lashley's point, that are important to student athletes going.
That's also my concern, is funding a new activity when we don't know where we're going to be with staff and whatever activities we have next year as well. Also my concern. Other comments or discussion?
It's a concern we talked about in our committee as well. That was the widest filter just like.
Anything else? Not, let's take a vote. If you are in favor of funding and sponsoring a 2020-2021 indoor track program for Goshen County, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. We can't stray from this agenda, but I see we have some materials here. Are those just for us to read?
Yes. Yes, as you can see, your delegate assembly resolutions, packet came in front of you. If you would want to, we will have that for discussion on a regular meeting next Tuesday. So if you could take a look at those, review that, and have further discussion under our board section, for communication section at the next meeting, we appreciate that.
Okay. Guess that's the end of our agenda, and I'll see you all next Tuesday.